Well, deciding to run for Congress at that age, it really is very statistically improbable. Very few women serve in Congress, even fewer young women serve in Congress. You know, most people, when they have a child, it's a time to maybe take some time back from their career. I made the opposite decision to sort of throw myself in this new direction. So it was a very unusual decision, and particularly for me, because I'd never worked on a campaign. I'd never run for office before. I'd been just sort of a normal person. I had a little business with my husband that I really enjoyed working on. So it was a strange turn of events, and the easiest thing to say is that becoming a mother actually did spark that change in me. My daughter was born on the day before the presidential primary in 2008 in Ohio, where we were living at the time. And I think her being born at that moment, combined with the shift that you naturally have when you become a mother, where you feel like the stakes are so much higher because you're not just thinking about your country anymore, you're thinking about the place that you're going to pass forward to your child. For me, that was the initial spark, and then I started noticing more things. I mean, little moments, like I went to the store to buy my daughter baby bottles, and you had to be so educated just not to buy the ones with the toxic BPA in them. I thought, how could our government have failed us? That they would allow this toxic substance to remain in bottles for babies. It's insane. And that sort of led to a train of thought where eventually, I guess my husband got fed up with me complaining and ranting and raving about these things, and he said, why don't you do something? Why don't you run for Congress? At first I thought it was a crazy idea. It was a crazy idea. But eventually I got kind of comfortable with the notion, and ultimately, when I was hemming and hawing, my husband put it to me, he said, you know, what's the worst thing that can happen? So you lose. Big deal. We can go back to the life we had before, but you might regret it if you don't give it a shot. And that was kind of the moment for me when I said, all right, I'll try. What's the worst that can happen? I was kind of surprised because at that point in my life, most of my interactions had seemed pretty gender neutral. I didn't feel like I'd been judged or held back in any way because I was a woman or because I was pregnant and getting ready to have a baby. But you know, politics really still is kind of a man's world. You have 19% of the Congress now. At the time it was 17% women. So very few women in Congress, and it's just, you go against type if you're a young woman in particular running. So you face a lot of little things. I'll give you a couple of examples. There was a man in our area who had worked on a lot of campaigns. He was supposedly very knowledgeable about the area and was going to help me with strategy. So I prepared for this meeting with him. I put together my plan. You know, here's how I'm going to win. Here's my fundraising plan. Went through all this trouble. Sat down with him at the restaurant, and the only thing he said to me was, cut your hair and stop talking about your kid. That was his sage wisdom for me. And there were other moments like that. There was a women's group, a feminist, pro-choice women's group that basically told me that they couldn't endorse me at that point because one of their board members didn't like my footwear, which is insane. And that's one of the things my campaign staffer said, the biggest difference between working for a man and working for a woman in politics is the amount of time that you spend thinking about what outfit to wear, and there's sort of no winning. You know, if I'd wear heels, people would say things like that's not appropriate, or they didn't like that. If I wore flats, they said you're tall, you should take advantage of your height. I mean, there was just no winning. So little things like that. I even had people tell me flat out that they wouldn't vote for me because they thought I should be home with my kids. And plenty of other people who were well-meaning, but who would ask the question that no male politician ever gets asked, which is, how are you going to take care of your child when you're in Washington? Which, you know, we would have managed, just like plenty of male politicians with kids manage. So there's little things like that that impact public perception.
Yeah.
Certainly part of why there are so few women is because they know that sort of scrutiny is coming. Actually, when women are asked the number one reason that they don't run for office, it's because they're concerned about the way that the media will portray them. So I think that is a very real element But actually, when women do run for office, they win just as often as men. So a lot of the barriers happen before a woman even steps out and becomes a candidate. I think it's complicated. I think we tend to hold ourselves to an unrealistic bar. You know, we think we have to be Hillary Clinton before we can run for public office, and it's not true. The men aren't like that. They don't show up from day one perfectly prepared. I mean, even if you look at presidential candidates, even if you think about Barack Obama back in 2008 running against Hillary Clinton, in those early debates, he wasn't perfect. You know, she really wiped the floor with him in the first couple of debates. He had to grow and stretch and get better. So we don't give ourselves that break. We compare ourselves to the almighty, so to speak, rather than just the competition. I also think women still aren't mentored and encouraged to run for office the way that men are. It's one of the most important factors. If a woman is asked to run, just like I was asked to run by my husband, they're much more likely to then see themselves as a candidate and think that they can do it. So those are a couple of the reasons. I think it's very complicated, but getting to the place of being able to see ourselves as candidates, I think is critical, and then taking the next step and actually running for office. Can have any role that they want. When I talk to women, young women in particular, which is one of my favorite things to do, even the ones, it's relatively rare that any of them are thinking about running for office, just like I wasn't thinking about running for office, but even the ones that do, they say, oh, way down the road, right? And we need to stop thinking that way. We need to think about the time is now. My country needs me now. I want to serve now, because the fact of the matter is, as I mentioned earlier, it's not just that we're lacking women in Congress, we're lacking young women. And that matters because Congress is a place where seniority counts. So the number of years you put in helps you rise up the ladder to be the committee chairwoman and to hold those reins of power. So if the young men are getting in early, so they're putting in that time and they're racking up those years in leadership, we need to make sure we're getting in early too and not waiting a lot. I mean, it's a great decision to make later down the road too. You see a lot of women who wait till their kids are out of high school and out of college before they step into the political fray. But it's really important that we have some that don't do that get in early, that are there while they have young kids, because they also bring that perspective to bear, or even before they have kids, so that they have that unique perspective that really is almost wholly lacking in Washington right now. I think first of all, just some of the numbers of how little representation there is of you as a young woman. Your voice is not really being heard in Washington, and I think it shows, and I think that's important to know. Second thing is, it's easy to feel powerless. It's easy to feel like the only ones with the power are the ones with the money, the ones with the connections. It's not true. That's a lie, and I think those groups that do have that power want you to continue to believe that lie. But there's a lot you can do just on social media. There's a lot you can do to organize pressure campaigns around issues that you care about. Quick example, when Rush Limbaugh last year called Sandra Fluke a slut and a prostitute for testifying that she thought birth control should be covered under health care reform, I was, as many people were, outraged. And I was one of the people who went online, went on Twitter, and started talking about it, and then started a petition that in 24 hours had over 100,000 signatures. And it started a real pressure campaign with then people calling its sponsors not to bully them, not to boycott them, but to say, hey, did you know that you're sponsoring Rush Limbaugh's program? Did you know that these are some of the things that he's been saying? And because of just that awareness, he had hundreds of sponsors who dropped his program. He was forced to apologize, which Rush Limbaugh has never apologized for anything before, and it really sparked a national debate about what was appropriate and what was okay in our public discourse and about the policy matter itself. So this was before I had a TV show. You know, I did have a pretty good Twitter following, but there were a lot of people other than me who were just totally normal citizens who participated and were incredibly part of that process. So don't feel powerless. So number one, know the numbers, know that you are not being represented. Number two, don't feel powerless. And number three, don't see yourself as a passive part of this country. You have to see yourself as an active participant. You are as important in this country a person as anyone else here. Don't see yourself on the sidelines, see yourself as an active participant.